CGC is lying to all of us, but I still plan to use their services. And so today, I'm going to talk about why both of those things are true. So first of all, what do I mean when I say that CGC is lying to us? Well, they promise on the front page of their website that they are able to provide an accurate, consistent, and impartial, remember that word, impartial assessment of the authenticity and grade of a comic book. In other words, they recognize that there is a problem with the buying and selling of comics because there is a conflict of interest between the seller and the buyer, where the seller is biased because, of course, he wants to make the most money, and so he is incentivized to overlook the flaws in a comic book. He might be selling his Amazing Spider-Man number 300 and see a couple of spine ticks, but he promises, all of these are going to easily be pressed out, and this is certainly a 9.8 comic book. Whereas the buyer, of course, is biased because they want to spend as little money as they can on the comic book, and so they're tempted to magnify every flaw. And so they say, hey, this looks a little funny. I think it's color touch. You're trying to sell me a restored comic. You better give it to me for half of what you're trying to sell it for. Well, CGC sees this conflict, and like a knight in shining armor, they promise to come in and save the day. And they say, hey guys, don't worry about it. We can provide an impartial grade because we really don't care what this comic sells for. If it sells for $100, great. If it sells for $200, great. If it sells for $300, awesome. The price it sells for doesn't influence the amount of money that we make, and so we can give an unbiased grade. And so let us do that grading for you, give you an accurate, consistent, impartial grade so that you know the true value of this comic book, and then you can reach a deal. But are they really able to do that? Can they provide an impartial grade? And the answer is a resounding no. So though it may be true that they don't care about this relationship at all because their money isn't affected by it, they do care about this relationship because their money is definitely very much affected by it. Because the main way that they make money is by sellers submitting books to them. And so if sellers are not happy with them, then they stop submitting those books, and all of a sudden the money dries up. And so CGC is incentivized to do whatever it takes to keep these sellers happy. So how do you keep sellers happy? Well, you keep them happy by, of course, giving them good grades so that they can make more money. And this leads to grade inflation, where CGC gives comics higher grades than they deserve in order to keep their sellers happy. And in my opinion, this is clearly what has started to happen when all of a sudden we've had a lot more 9.9s that have been graded. I mean, have these 9.9s just been hiding around in attics and basements for decades? No, of course not. But CGC has realized, our sellers aren't happy. Maybe it's because of the recent scams or just it's a downtime for the comic business. And they say, well, what can we do? Because we need business from these guys. How can we make them more happy? I've got it. Well, instead of giving them 9.8s, let's give them 9.9s because they're going to get more money from that, and then they're going to be happy with us, and then they're going to submit more books to us. Now, of course, they can't go too crazy because they do care about this relationship a little bit, just a little bit. They don't really care about the buyer, but they know that if the buyer loses trust in them because they're inflating the grades way high, then all of a sudden these buyers can be like, hey, this is a 9.9, this is 7.0, what are you talking about? And so they're going to stop buying the comics. Sellers are obviously going to be angry that the buyers aren't buying the comics, and then they're going to stop submitting to CGC. And so that limits CGC from going crazy with their grade inflation, and to make it just this kind of gradual bump here and there. But they are certainly still inflating their grades. But the fact that they have to go gradual also screws you and me, the common man, over more. Because CGC realizes they can't just all of a sudden pump out 100 giant-sized X-Men #1 9.9s. Maybe they can do 1 a year, maybe 2 a year. We'll see what they do. So they realize, well, I can, maybe give 1 or 2 of these out. Well, who are they going to give them to? Are they going to give them to little scrubs like me and you who maybe submit a few $100s worth of comics every year? Of course not. We're peons to them. Who are they going to give those 9.9s to? Well, of course, it's going to be to the auction houses who aren't submitting hundreds of dollars of comics like I am, but are submitting hundreds of thousands of comics and maybe even millions of dollars of comics. I mean, who does CGC need to prioritize? Well, of course, as a business, they're not the knight in shining armor that they may want to look like, but they are a business and they are going to want to satisfy the auction houses more than they want to satisfy me. Of course, in a perfect world, they want to satisfy all of us, right? I mean, they want as much business as they can get, but again, they can't go hog wild with the grade inflation, so it's limited in what they can do, and so they're, of course, going to prioritize their biggest customers, their biggest clients. And like all types of inflation, the little man is who ends up getting screwed. And this all reminds me of our current monetary system, and this is why I'm still going to submit to CGC, even though this sucks. It's terrible, but it's the system that we live in. So looking at our monetary system, as you are probably aware, we currently use fiat money as currency. In other words, this is money that's not backed by a commodity, such as gold, which is what our money used to be backed up by. But when the Bretton Woods system came to an end in 1971, our currency stopped being backed by gold and instead became fiat money, which wasn't backed by anything except for the government's goodwill and the fact that they are trusting that we as citizens still believe in the value of the dollar. So the dollar bill itself, it doesn't have inherent value like it used to. Back a century ago, the dollar supply was limited by the amount of gold that was in the Federal Reserve. But that came to an end in 1971. And so now the government can just print however much money they want. And of course, they want to print money. They want to spend. First of all, so that they can get the money and pay themselves, but also because they know that they can make their constituents happy by paying for things. And they don't want to get that money by raising taxes because that will make constituents angry. So what's the key? Well, they can just print more money. And that makes everybody happy for a short time. But all of a sudden, when you increase the money supply, then the money that is already there is debased. In other words, let's just live in this imaginary world where you owned $1 out of the $10 that existed. That means you have 1/10 of the wealth in the world. Well, all of a sudden, what the government just decides to create out of thin air another $10, and they start spending on it. Well, all of a sudden, you only have $1 out of 20. 1/20th of the wealth in the world, and your wealth has been cut in half simply from the government printing more money. And that's what happens. And the person who is hurt is the person who already has the money. And it's the same thing with what's going to happen with these 9.9s. The people who are going to be the most hurt are the people who already have 9.9s and the people who already have 9.8s. And those assets are going to become debased. And so it stinks. And so you might be wondering, well, Wahoo, why are you still going to use CGC when you're so upset about this? Well, I'm going to be doing it for the same reason that I'm still working to earn dollars. Even though my dollars are being debased by the government printing money, just like my comic books are being debased by what CGC I feel is currently doing now, it's just the system that we live in. And I can work for change, but I'm just a peon, right? And there's nothing special about me. And so unfortunately got to work within the system. And so just like I understand the dollar, it holds value now, even though not as much, I realized the best way to get value out of the right comic books. Certainly we need to be choosy about what comics we're getting graded if we're looking at them for investment purposes. But CGC still carries the name, carries the weight, carries the trust of the seller and buyer, and so still retains enough value where if you're interested in the value of your comic books, now again, some people get them graded not for monetary reasons, but monetary reasons are a big part of the reason I personally get mine graded. I also want to preserve them in some other things. But if monetary factors are something that you're considering, well, again, for the right books, it still makes sense to use CGC, in my opinion. And yeah, that might come to an end one day, just like if the government prints too much money. This has happened in other countries. It can lead to hyperinflation where people lose their trust in the currency and then the economy collapses. Well, the same thing could happen to CGC, where seller and buyer, especially the buyer, of course, in this case, loses trust in the authenticity of the grades, stops buying, and could lead to a total collapse of the CGC product. But as a lot of people say, it seems like both the dollar and CGC are too big to fail. Now, I don't fully believe in that. I do believe those things can fail. But I think we're a bit away from either of those things happening. So in the meantime, I will continue to work for dollars. I will continue to submit the right books to CGC and let the chips fall where they may. But you tell me, is grade inflation affecting your decisions about whether or not to get your comics graded? Or am I even making sense here? Or am I just some old man off his rocker? Now, there are other ways that I think CGC might be lying to us, and other reasons that I'm going to still submit to them. But this is all I'm going to talk about in this video. But tell me in the comments below if you would like to hear more of this kind of stuff. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, I'd appreciate it if you consider doing so now. Thanks for watching.